Well, this is a CNN special report. White House in crisis, and breaking tonight, key evidence in the Russia investigation eluding Congress as the FBI fails to turn over the secret memos of the fire director James Comey. I'm Pamela Brown.
And I'm Jim Sciutto. We also have exclusive news CNN reporting tonight on another lapse by Attorney General Jeff Sessions in disclosing his contacts with the Russians. And here's what we know at this hour. CNN has learned that Attorney General Sessions did not report his meetings with Russian officials and other foreign contacts when he applied for his security clearance. Now the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee is demanding an investigation. Also tonight, crucial questions unanswered about conversations between President Trump and his former FBI director, James Comey. Requests by Congress for Comey's memos or any White House tapes that might exist were declined. A special counsel, Robert Mueller, is expected to ask for the very same information. This as Comey's actions in the Hillary Clinton email investigation are in the spotlight once again tonight. The Washington Post reporting that the FBI probe was influenced by what's being called a dubious document, a potentially fake memo that may have been part of Russia's effort to influence the U.S. election. And ousted National Security Advisor Michael Flynn has defied Congress once again, denying the House Intelligence Committee's request for documents about his Russia connections. Flynn's now expected to be hit with yet another round of subpoenas.
So let's get more now on CNN's exclusive reporting on Attorney General Sessions and his Russia contacts. CNN's team of reporters with us tonight, Manu Raju, Evan Perez, who broke this story. Right after the story broke, it didn't take long for Capitol Hill to react. Manu.
Yeah, that's right. Not surprisingly, the Democrats jumped all over this. John Conyers, the top Democrat in the House Judiciary Committee, saying it's time to investigate Jeff Sessions, and also other Democrats saying as well it's time to have at least a hearing to get to the bottom of this. But I can tell you, as we were reporting out this story and talking to members on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, they do want to talk to Sessions about not just his meetings that he had with the Russian ambassador that he failed to disclose, not just in his security clearance forms, but also during his Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings, but also his role in the firing of James Comey, even though since he had recused himself from overseeing the probe after he belatedly disclosed those meetings to the Judiciary Committee. So a lot of questions left for Jeff Sessions, but tonight the Justice Department also saying that he did not do anything wrong. They said they got advice from the FBI not to give not to disclose these meetings on a security clearance form. But as Evan will tell you, the FBI did not comment when we asked them about it.
And of course, John Conyers is calling for an investigation now. How significant is this, Evan? Help us understand what this means.
Well, look, I mean, there does seem to be a misunderstanding somewhere in there. The Justice Department says that they were relying on a FBI investigator who helped them fill out this form. And as a matter of fact, Jeff Sessions' assistant had initially reported a year's worth of meetings, dozens of meetings with ambassadors from not only from Russia, but around the world, that the senator, the then senator, had during the past year, and then he was told to take them off the form. So there's some misunderstanding here that occurred. We talked to an outside expert on filling out these SF-86 forms, and he says that he should have disclosed these things. So we'll see. Maybe members of Congress will get a chance to get to the bottom of that. But going to what Manu was mentioning, it goes beyond this. I think members of Congress also want to know why Jeff Sessions played such a role in the firing of James Comey if he was recused. Now, the answer from the Justice Department is, well, the firing of James Comey had nothing to do with Russia, except that then the president has now stepped on them and said it had to do with Russia. So that's the problem for the Justice Department.
Here's the thing to keep in mind. We're not just talking about any random meetings with random diplomats from a random country. We're talking about the Russian ambassador from Russia in the midst of Russian interference in the U.S. election process. So this is not, I mean, this is material to certainly the investigation, but also at a time, it's not, I mean, the point being, it's not just any meeting.
Right. And part of security clearance is the reason you fill out the form is to make sure the people doing the clearance, make sure a foreign government isn't trying to exert undue influence,
and
whatever the case may be. And
Ambassador Kislyak is known to be recruiting sources here in the U.S. And I don't raise that to think he was recruiting Sessions necessarily to be a source, but just that here's a guy who's, I mean, perhaps dangerous. He's exactly the kind of guy you would want to report on his forms.
Well, exactly, particularly if you're in the middle of a firestorm about Russia. Why would you not err on the side of caution and disclose. And the question I have is, why wouldn't the FBI say, of course, do this? I mean, it sort of seems counterintuitive to me for the FBI to say, don't do this, unless they didn't want to have to check out a list of 5,000 meetings that he might have had as a senator with all kinds of diplomats.
And it is true that senators have lots and lots of meetings with foreign diplomats, with ambassadors. But I just want to underscore, as somebody like you, Manu, who's covered the Hill for a long time, it is one thing for these people who have political sensibilities to not disclose that they're meeting with the ambassador from Iceland. It is another thing for them to not disclose that they're meeting with the ambassador from Russia, given the context of everything that was.
Especially because
Well,
some
of
of
course,
these
he
meetings,
didn't disclose it in the testimony, and that,
exactly.
I mean,
So across the board.
And these meetings were occurring even during the time that it was already known that the Russians were meddling. We were reporting it. Some of the emails had already started coming out. It was already out there that the Russians were involved in the hacking of the DNC. So if you know, and by this point, by the way, Jeff Sessions knew that he was going to serve in the administration if Donald Trump won, why wouldn't you do that?
You bring up the other time that he failed to disclose. Let's just remind our audience it was during his confirmation hearings where, when asked by Democratic Senator Al Franken, he did not reveal meetings with Russians as well. Have a listen.
If there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
He said it right there. I did not have communications with the Russians. Another opportunity in public session where he didn't answer truthfully.
And of course, then he came back and amended his answer. But it's not just Jeff Sessions. There's also Jared Kushner, and you have reporting, Gloria, that he didn't disclose.
Well, we first reported this in early April, that Jared Kushner, in filling out his first security clearance form, left that space blank, and his attorney described it to me as an error. They called the next day. The attorney had to say the next day that we're going to amend this form. The explanation was that it was done by somebody in the transition who didn't know any better. But as we all know, Jared has had multiple meetings with Russians, but a large number of meetings, particularly after the election, with foreign dignitaries, diplomats, et cetera, because he was known as the man to see in terms of foreign policy. So they are still working with the FBI on his clearance. He now has interim clearance, but it seems to me that these things need to start getting resolved, particularly if you have high security clearance in the White House.
And big picture, all of these things put together is what is making, forget about Democrats, Republicans more and more anxious and concerned. It's because, let's just say that all of these were mistakes, but it's the drip, 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 drip of the acknowledging the mistakes and the mistakes coming out, and why weren't they disclosed initially, knowing how bad this is, and puts into the atmosphere the questions of why? And even if they're completely innocent and there are legitimate explanations.
And particularly in the aftermath of John Brennan's own testimony just yesterday, saying that he was deeply concerned about all these contacts that were occurring between Russian officials reaching out to people in the Trump campaign, and now when you don't have the disclosure that would essentially erase any doubt, it looks like that they're trying to hide something.
And here's the problem. The fact is that the reason why you disclose is because it's very likely that some of these people, some of these Russians, are being watched and being monitored by U.S. intelligence. So Kislyak is definitely being watched. And so I can bet you that if he sent back a report of his meeting with Jeff Sessions, that the U.S. intelligence agencies already have this.
And we know that they have
because,
Russia-to-Russia conversations where they're talking about cultivating relationships with Trump campaign advisors, as we first reported on Friday.
Well, you make a point, but you disclose because there's a chance you're going to be caught out if you don't. But you also perish the thought. You also disclose because it's the honest thing to do. Because that's what these forms ask you to do.
How often is it?
As you're applying for the highest offices in the land.
You're dealing with classified information. And if you're Jared Kushner and you've met with Kislyak or you've met with Sergei Gorkov, an entity that's been sanctioned by the United States government, you need to explain why. And particularly because you will be dealing with this high-level classified information, and the United States government has to be sure that you haven't been compromised at some point.
So another question, Pam and I, we've been, and as a team, we've been looking at is what exactly did the president say to James Comey, rather, say to the president in their private meeting? Congressional investigators trying to figure out their next moves to obtain key evidence in the Russia investigation. That deadline passing tonight for the FBI to give Congress James Comey's memos that sources tell CNN documented the former director's conversations with President Trump. The memos, or possible White House tapes as well, might shed light on a pivotal question. Did Comey assure the president he was not under investigation on 3 separate occasions, as Mr. Trump claims? CNN's Anderson Cooper asked a friend and confidant of Comey about that very question. Here's his answer.
I have no firsthand knowledge of that. I've never talked to him about it. I would bet every dollar that I had that no such communication ever took place. It's simply inconceivable to me that Comey would tell the president that.
Tonight, Benjamin Wittes had more to say in the legal advocacy blog he writes. He writes, quote, "I could easily imagine Trump's asking repeatedly, am I under investigation? And repeatedly receiving the answer, you are not currently the target of any investigation." Trump could then assign whatever meaning he wanted to that answer. That is not the same thing. You guys know this well. You may not be the target today. Doesn't mean that's not going to change.
I was watching that interview last night, and we were struck.
We were surprised.
I was very struck. I mean, I know Ben Wittes, and I know the way James Comey talks, and I was struck by what Wittes said to Anderson Cooper, because knowing how Comey talks and knowing the question that was being asked, I can see where Comey would answer the question in exactly the way that Ben now says he might have answered, which is, you're not currently the target of this investigation, which is what, by the way, Comey did tell the members of Congress when he briefed them on this, the top 8 leaders.
I think there's still an open question about when and if Comey does testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee, even though he did agree to it. What we don't know is exactly the concerns that Bob Mueller, the special counsel, may have in him testifying. And I can tell you, in talking to some members today, they're not so sure what he's going to do. They're waiting for his next step, which is one reason why, too, he has not disclosed his memos as asked for by these key committees, and that's upsetting some members.
It's also interesting to think about the way the president was receiving this information, because he's not an attorney, he's not a Washington person, and there's another point that Ben Wittes made in this article, which is, Comey's very careful with his language, as you point out, and that a counterintelligence investigation, and these are Ben Wittes' thoughts, not mine, is generally an investigation of a person or an entity. So if the president asked, am I the subject of your investigation, because there may not have been an investigation on the president specifically alone, then James Comey could have said, no, you're not
the target.
You're not.
But here's what we know and what we've reported, that part of Robert Mueller's probe will be looking into obstruction of justice, which would include the interactions that President Trump had with James Comey, which is one of the reasons why you don't ever come out and really tell someone what the status is, because you don't know where investigations will go.
So the answer might have changed.
So the answer might have changed, is what I'm saying.
It's another instance of the cover-up possibly worse than the crime. So in the case of collusion, not clear, no evidence, and we'll make that clear to the audience. We're not implying that there's evidence that President Trump himself colluded with the Russians, but still a subject of investigation. But obstruction of justice, in light of the conversations or the content of those conversations, we know it's a legal standard that, based on all the lawyers we speak to, has not been met, but it's getting closer.
It is, and look, and also very, very hard to prove, even if it did happen legally. Hard to prove and hard to prosecute by the experience of many people who have tried. But there's legal and then there's political.
Right. Yeah.
And which is why the fact that the congressional investigations are still ongoing is really critical and bad news for this White House, because let's just say at the end of the day, Robert Mueller doesn't have anything that he can criminally, legally do to, forget about the president, but maybe even other people in and around his orbit. It's a very different thing when you have investigators on Capitol Hill who want to have testimony in private and in public and will come out with a report on things that the public might view as incredibly inappropriate, like, for example, asking the FBI director, please lay off my former NSA, a national security advisor, because he didn't do anything wrong, and God only knows what else.
Benjamin Wittes, sorry, Evan, when we hear Benjamin Wittes' account, we know that he's in touch with Comey. So, so this is not just any blog that we're quoting here. It's an informed person writing an informed account of what Comey believes he said to the president. You talk to sources about this all the time, and you speak to people close to Comey. What do you find the credible about that conversation?
Well, I think the credibility, the most credible part is the fact that the president would deem to ask such a question. It's so inappropriate, but I can totally see the president just going straight forward, because he's such a straightforward man, to straightforwardly asking Comey whether he's under investigation. He wants to know. And he also wants to know, at the same time, he's trying to decide whether Comey stays in the job. Keep in mind, that's what's the conversation is happening at the same time. So I believe that, and I can also believe that Comey would find a way to answer the question, at least in the moment, of what is true. And like you said, that answer might have changed.
Remember how he prepped before his conversations with the president, we're told through a source familiar, that before he went in there, he would want to have an idea, okay, what could I be asked and how can I answer it? And remember how, and what I'm told is that it was a more nuanced conversation than him just saying, you know,
exactly,
you are, you're not.
And I was pointed to this blog tonight, I would say, by somebody who is a friend of James Comey's, and said to me, oh, you ought to read this. So I'm wondering whether that was a signal to us that perhaps this is in fact what occurred.
But getting back to Evan's point, I mean, I think that he most certainly sidestepped this question when the president, assuming you did ask this question, if I'm under investigation, look at the way he answered that question in his congressional testimony. He said that I'm not going to comment on who's under investigation, but I don't want anyone to read into this. He kept saying that, don't read into my no comment. So you can interpret that, well, I'm not under investigation, or you can interpret it as maybe you will be someday. Depends on which side you sit on.
And we don't know that.
Right. And we know this is the thing that kept really annoying the president. He could not understand why, if members of Congress are being told this, right? And we know that Senator Grassley has now gone out and essentially said, this is what James Comey told us. And so you know the president is very frustrated because he wants this out there, and James Comey will not do that.
Right. Listen, so the big question now is, will Comey get to speak his version of the story in public setting? He may have an opportunity. We'll see what the special counsel has to say. Coming up, was Jim Comey duped by the Russians and a dubious document?
New details on that when our special report continues right after this break. Well, tonight we're learning about another possible target of Russia's efforts to meddle in the U.S. election. A new Washington Post report revealing that the FBI's investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails may have been influenced by the Russians and a secret and possibly fake document. We're joined by Devlin Barrett, one of the Washington Post reporters who broke this story. So, Devlin, great to have you on. Was James Comey actually swayed by this document? What can you tell us about this?
A number of officials have said that this document was a key part of the thinking process that went into the FBI's July announcement. If you think back to July when the FBI director announced we are not charging anyone with anything related to Clinton email, but we do have a bunch of, frankly, criticisms of what happened.
Reckless, he called it reckless.
Reckless, yes. And not only reckless, but they've said that this document, while they couldn't talk about it because it was classified, was an important part of their thinking. And they've said that as recently as last month and last week. And for our report, a number of officials familiar with it continue to insist that this is an important document. But there's a lot of reasons to think that this document may just be bogus.
Why is it? What are those reasons?
So, for one thing, the FBI itself always had doubts about this document. Those doubts really solidified, we're told, in August, when they decided it was unreliable and based on multiple levels of hearsay. The document is essentially it purports to be a Russian intelligence analysis that talks about emails among Americans, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the then head of the DNC, and others, describing some sort of tacit agreement that the DOJ, the Justice Department, would not let the FBI go too far against Hillary Clinton in that case. But one of the things that you find as you call up all these people is that they don't know each other. Not only do they deny having the conversations, in one case, you know, we talked to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it's like, I've literally never heard of that person. I have no idea what you're talking about. The other reason that, frankly, some of the people we've talked to are very skeptical of this document is when you look at the names that are pulled in there, it's a little bit like a Russian Mad Libs of Americans we hate. And it really is suspicious to some people that this collection of humans who fit a sort of Russian conspiracy theory about how America works would, in fact, all be talking to each other.
Why didn't Comey know that?
Well, exactly.
Well, it's a great question, and there really seems to be, frankly, a disconnect between the folks who we're talking to who have looked at the document, have looked at this issue, and frankly, who are having these conversations in real time when the investigation was going forward. And now, when the FBI and others have really tried to justify what the Bureau did.
That's the question that I've heard from inside the Bureau, because he obliquely has referred to this in testimony. And one of the things I've heard from people inside the Bureau is that simply what we're seeing is a little bit of a rehash and a little bit of rewriting of history, because at the time, by July, when he decides that he is going to do this press conference, James Comey has already months ago had decided that he alone could be the man that could give this answer to the American public. So he's now, you know, I'm not saying that he's being dishonest, but I'm saying is that they're reaching for things that, you know, that frankly...
Retroactive justification.
Yeah, and let's take a listen to what he said May 3rd in his own words in his testimony.
I struggled as we got closer to the end of it with a number of things that had gone on, some of which I can't talk about yet, that made me worry that the department leadership could not credibly complete the investigation and decline prosecution without grievous damage to the American people's confidence in the justice system. And then the capper was, and I'm not picking on the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, who I like very much, but her meeting with President Clinton on that airplane was the capper for me.
I remember when he said that.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
No, absolutely. And I, too, have been told by people who are familiar with what Comey at the time told Congress is that this was a big, big part of his reasoning for taking this away from the Justice Department. And just kind of big picture, this isn't just kind of, of course, a process question of whether it's the FBI or the Justice Department. This is about something that could have really very much fundamentally changed the course of the presidential campaign because of the way that he spoke. Yes, he did a press conference initially saying, I'm not going to press charges, but then he also said some pretty devastating things about Hillary Clinton that would not have happened had he followed normal protocol.
You know what's
Which he didn't think he should do because of the...
What's interesting about this is we had been warned as the stolen emails were coming out during the campaign, Clinton DNC emails, about Russian tactics, and this goes back to Soviet days, pre-cyber days, of sneaking fake stuff in with the real stuff to dupe people. We'd been warned about that as the stolen emails were coming out, as we were trying to vet them to some degree. Wouldn't it be interesting if it was the FBI that got duped?
I think alarming is the right question.
But keep in mind also, you know, the fact remains that even within the Bureau, there's a little bit of confusion as to if this document really was real and if there was such an email, why wouldn't the Russians have released it? You know, at the time. And so that also is one reason why people just doubted that anything like that actually
existed. It doesn't make any sense. How could the FBI director be duped by the Russians on something like you said that is so simple to check out?
And look, if you go back and just parse his words.
A really important part of the timeline is in August, because in August the investigation is over. And in August the FBI decides to go ask Attorney General Lynch about it. And they go and ask her, and what we're told happens in that conversation is she says, just so we're clear, I don't know this person. I've never communicated with this person. I have no idea what you're talking about.
I think that they would have done that.
And they tell her, according to the people who've described this conversation, the agents tell the Attorney General, this document has no investigative value. That's
So
what they
this
tell
is
him.
scary. Because if it actually, I mean, as you said, alarming. If this actually influenced James Comey, and all they could have done was pick up the phone and call Debbie Wasserman Schultz
To see if it's real.
to see if it's real, or Amanda Renteria from the Clinton campaign. That's easy.
But
That's
we know
what
the
we do
FBI
every day. We make these phone calls.
But it's just fascinating, you, again, parsing his words. It said it made him, I mean, assuming he's talking about the document, it seems like he's obliquely referring to it, that it made him worried about the credibility of the leadership of the department and its ability to continue this investigation, and yet this could turn out to be fake, which is something he could have vetted himself. It certainly raises a lot of questions. Great reporting,
He'll be
Devlin
asked
Barrett.
about it.
Coming up, a congressional race in Montana might be testing voters' loyalty to President Trump, but just hours before tomorrow's special election, a reporter accuses the Republican candidate of body slamming him. We're going to bring you all the latest details, including audio and audio recording of this incident.
Get the hell out of here! The last time I did the same thing, you were the Guardian? Yes, and you just broke my process.
President Trump is just hours away from crucial meetings with NATO allies. Leaders will likely seek reassurance from the president after he dismissed the alliance as obsolete during the campaign. Complicating matters, fresh concerns over President Trump's treatment of classified information, including an Oval Office conversation with Russian officials that possibly endangered the life of an Israeli agent. Sarah Murray is traveling with the president in Belgium. Sarah, what is the White House expecting from their visit to Brussels with NATO?
Well, good morning, Jim. I think a lot of this foreign trip we've seen so far has been pomp and circumstance, but we really move into issues beginning today when President Trump heads to this meeting with NATO leaders. As you mentioned, during the campaign, Trump called NATO obsolete. He has since decided it's not obsolete, but he is still expected to press a number of the member countries to increase their defense spending. And you can certainly bet that in the wake of that horrific attack in Manchester, there will be a broader discussion about terrorism and the terrorist threats that our European allies face. Now, the other big issue to watch is the fact that President Trump is still weighing whether to send additional troops to Afghanistan. He'll be asking our allies to weigh in on that and may press them to see if other NATO countries are willing to contribute to this military effort. He's sure to face sharp questions about why President Trump and his advisors believe that potentially sending a few more thousand troops to Afghanistan could turn the tide in this 16-year-long war. And last but not least, this question of intelligence sharing, whether President Trump and whether America can be trusted intelligence partners after, of course, we learned that he shared highly classified information with Russian officials. Back to you guys.
Sarah Murray there live in Brussels. Another big test for the president tomorrow here at home, a special election in Montana, a state that he won by 20 points, but the number's now much closer. Dana Bass having more on the contest. As we look at the polls going into this, yet another bellwether of where the president stands and the party stands, how concerned should Republicans be?
They're pretty concerned. They're concerned that this, if, and it is right now a big if the Republicans were to lose this, their red seat, first in Montana tomorrow, and then there's later a runoff in Georgia, that it's not necessarily about Russia at all. It could be about, and it probably is more about health care and other issues. But tell that to Republicans and pretty much any member of Congress who has it in their DNA to run scared when something looks like a canary in a coal mine. And so that is why they are watching. And I've talked to Republicans who say this particular race in Montana was tightening big time, big time. And they're concerned about the fact that if something happens and it doesn't go their way, then already you are seeing this sort of, in a nuanced way, Republicans moving more and more towards the notion of, you know what, let's not be completely attached to this president. Let's be, particularly in Russia, more aggressive about getting to the bottom of it, that could happen in spades.
So you mentioned if something happens, and lo and behold, something happened tonight, unexpected. I can only describe it.
I did not set that up for you on purpose.
Well, as WWE meets local politics here, but a reporter for the Guardian newspaper saying that he was body slammed, his words, by the Republican frontrunner. Have a listen to an audio tape of that encounter here.
Into the CBO score, because you know you were waiting to make your decision about health care until you saw the bill and it just came out. And what you thought
we'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, but there's not going to be time. I'm just curious if you
okay,
have
speak
right
with
now.
Shane, please.
But you
Sick and tired of you guys. The last time you came in here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here. The last guy did the same thing. You were the guardian? Yes, and you just broke my glasses. You, the last guy did the same damn thing.
You just body slammed me and broke my glasses.
Get the hell out of here.
You'd like me to get the hell out? I'd also like to call the police. Can I get you guys' names?
Hey, you gotta leave.
He just body slammed me.
You gotta leave.
This is violence against a reporter covering a person running for the U.S. Congress.
Right.
I mean, we were hearing lately there were Fox News reporters on the scene who were saying that they saw Ben Jacobs there, the Guardian reporter, get two hands around his neck by the Republican candidate. I mean, how big of a problem is this for the Republican frontrunner?
I think it's a big problem for him that we're hours ago before the election. There's a
If you look at the early special elections that have occurred in all Republican districts so far, they've been in closer margins than Republicans could have liked. They did not go as handedly to the Republican candidates as they did for Donald Trump in last year's elections. Even the Georgia special election that had gone into a runoff, the Republicans were forced to spend a lot of money. You're going to see them spending a lot of money to save a seat in Kansas, to potentially save a seat in Georgia if they are successful in that Georgia runoff, and to potentially save a seat in Montana, all seats that they should easily win, and that portends problems down the road.
To your credit, you're taking very kindly. You're looking at the numbers and where but this is a Republican frontrunner physically attacking a journalist,
right? And
in an environment
where it's a bit of a trend right here.
Right.
I mean, as Dana was mentioning, I mean, I think just last week we had a reporter from CQ Roll Call, John Donnelly, who was essentially pinned to a wall for daring to approach the FCC chairman and commissioner to ask a question after a press conference. I mean, this is not something that is normal, but we're seeing a lot more of these, and I think it is something to be concerned about.
I think he feels sort of this candidate, this Republican, who is supposed to just breeze into this seat. He's had $6 million spent against him. Rob Quist, the Democrat, is not a practiced politician. He plays in a band, and he goes around playing his guitar at campaign appearances, and he's, this candidate, Republican, is feeling the heat here, as you point out, Manu, a lot of these Republican candidates who just thought, well, this is going to be...
And one of the big
how much
surrogates...
heat is the White House feeling in all of this? I mean, that's really the big picture question here as we focus on these...
And they haven't responded to these this attack against this reporter. Neither has the Speaker's office. I reached out to Paul Ryan's office tonight. No response there. But, Gianforte, the Republican candidate, has aligned himself very closely with the Trump White House. Donald Trump Jr. has been out there to campaign for him.
Marco Rubio just campaigned for him.
But to Dana's point, I mean, if the Republican loses there and elsewhere in Georgia, the White House will be concerned that Republicans will turn on it,
absolutely. Look, there's so much focus broadly in the political world on what happens in the midterm elections, whether or not there's a chance that the 24-seat majority that Republicans have will be lost. But again, the question is whether or not the canary in the coal mine is in the next month or two, and whether or not this particular atmosphere, even though there is a Republican-led Congress that should be kind of a political firewall for this president, will begin to crumble because of concern about what is going to happen in 2020.
And now thrown into this already difficult environment is a possible assault, right, by a politician against a journalist covering his campaign. We're going to have the results of this race tomorrow night, so tune in tomorrow. We're going to be following it very closely.
That's right. All right, so switching gears here, next week would have been President John F. Kennedy's 100th birthday. And as we approach the milestone, CNN sat down with JFK's daughter, Caroline, to reflect on her father's life and legacy. Jake Tapper has that exclusive interview just ahead.
Tonight, at a time of crisis for the Trump White House, memories of another era when the nation elected a young president and then only 3 years later mourned his death.
We have an exclusive new interview with Caroline Kennedy about the 35th president of the United States, the man she called Dad. Here's CNN's Jake Tapper.
Next Monday, May 29th, it's Memorial Day, but it's something else, too. It's what would have been President John F. Kennedy's 100th birthday, a big moment for those who revere and admire the youngest man ever elected to the office of president, and a man who only served 1,037 days because traumatic afternoon in Dallas in 1963. The JFK legacy, however, lives on, and here to talk about President Kennedy's legacy exclusively with CNN is Caroline Kennedy. She's President John F. Kennedy's daughter and also the former U.S. ambassador to Japan. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. It's quite nice. The JFK Presidential Library and Foundation is set to unveil a special video message this evening to commemorate the 100th anniversary, featuring your children, JFK's only grandchildren. You're giving us graciously this first look at it. So why don't we roll this video and then we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay. It would be my father's 100th birthday. I've thought about him and missed him every day of my life. But growing up without him was made easier thanks to all the people who kept him in their hearts, who told me that he inspired them to work and fight and believe in a better world, to give something back to this country that has given so much to so many. I remember hiding underneath my father's Oval Office desk when I was little and sitting on his lap on the honey fits. He would point out the white shark and the purple shark who always followed the boat, although I could never quite see them. He said they especially liked to eat socks and would have his friends throw their socks overboard, which I loved. President Kennedy inspired a generation that transformed America. They marched for justice. They served in the Peace Corps, in the inner cities, in outer space. His brothers carried on that work, fighting against poverty, violence, and war, championing human rights, health care, and immigration. As my father said in his inaugural address, this work will not be finished in our lifetime. It's up to us to continue to pass these values on to our children and grandchildren.
One of the defining relationships in my life is with someone I have never met, my grandfather, President John F. Kennedy. It's a little odd to be connected to someone you don't know, especially when everyone else has access to much of the same information about him that you do. Throughout my life, I have been able to connect with my grandfather through the study of history, which I know he loved, both studying his life and studying the eras and patterns that fascinated him. To me, that is where he lives, as a historical figure rooted in the past, but also as a person connected to so much of what came after him, through his writings and from the stories my relatives have told me. But while my grandfather had reverence for the past and the lessons it could impart, he also knew that America was a country where change was possible, where we aren't bound solely by tradition if we understand the past with which we are breaking.
I'm inspired by my grandfather's sense of equality, his courage in naming the injustices in American society, and his call for action. His words and his ideals mean so much to me and to the world we live in today. But we are still faced with tremendous inequality and injustice, from voting rights to our criminal justice system and mass incarceration. My grandfather would be proud of how far we've come as a nation since 1963, but he'd have been the first to tell us that we have a long way to go. I hope everyone, regardless of age or party, will remember what President Kennedy told America decades ago. This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened.
President Kennedy was elected on a platform of challenges and not promises, not for what he would offer the American people as president, but what he would ask of them. My favorite speech is the one that President Kennedy gave at Rice University, where he makes the case for sending a man to the moon. He said that that challenge was worthwhile not because it would be easy, but because it would be so hard. My generation will inherit a complicated world with countless unsolved problems. Climate change is just one of them, but it's the type of challenge I think my grandfather would have been energized about and eager to solve. He cared deeply about the environment, about science and technology, and he recognized that only if America leads the world in solving global problems can we make sure that it's done right. From that speech at Rice, and from the space program he helped launch, we can learn a simple but important lesson. Great challenges are opportunities, and it is each generation's responsibility to meet those challenges with the same combination of energy, faith, and devotion that President Kennedy and his contemporaries displayed decades ago. I know that we're up to the task, but we have to demand action from our leaders, and we have to vote.
As his family, we're so proud of what my father stood for during his life.
I'm obviously coming, your father's 100th birthday is coming up Monday. I'm sure there were a lot of people wanting you to talk, wanting your children to talk.
Well, as he becomes part of history, I think it's important to show sort of what he still means to us as a person. And I think each of my kids had a different, slightly take on it, but there's a lot of emotion there, and I think that probably is something that we could share better on camera.
I love that story about your dad telling you about the white shark and the purple shark following you and making his friends throw socks in. It's such a great, corny dad joke. But I do wonder, hearing it, like, is it difficult having your dad be this icon that the rest of us feel like we have a sense of and we have a take on, and he's part of our lives in a way, and you actually knew him?
Well, I think really he sort of, growing up, he was sort of part of everyone's life. And so that was a very special and unique thing for me. But I think it really meant a lot, and I think it made it a lot easier. And I had so many relatives, obviously, as well. So the fact that people would come up to me every day and say, you know, I got involved in my community because of your father's inaugural speech. And even when I was in Japan, people were still telling me that they had memorized that speech, that they were so inspired by President Kennedy's vision of service and of American leadership, that I think that really kept him alive.
There aren't a lot of inaugural speeches that people are still quoting from.
Right.
I mean, when you think about it. Why was it important to have your children in it? We don't often see Rose, Tatiana, and Jack. They're kind of they're private figures.
Well, I think the point here is that that he is a historical figure. 100 years is a really long time, but I think his legacy and his values are timeless and they live on. And we want to encourage younger people today who are still very curious about President Kennedy to connect with those values, to connect with his message of justice and service and courage, and innovation and experimentation and the belief in America. So they, I think, are the best people to take that message forward into the 21st century.
Your daughter, I believe it was Rose, said, I mean, it might have been Tatiana, actually, that growing up, she'd never even met him, so she learned about him the same way that I learned about him in school. What did your kids ask you about him when they were growing up?
I can't, well, now they're older, so I think that they were both interested in anything that I remembered, which are mostly childhood memories. So when they were little, we could talk about those things, and hiding under the desk, or my pony, or my pets. And I know when my Uncle Teddy came to talk to their classes, he would always talk about all the pets that had lived in the White House, things like that. But as they got older, I think they really became interested in the issues and their relevance today. So many of the issues that that are now in the headlines had their roots in the 1960s, whether it's working through multilateral institutions like the UN or the environmental movement, and civil rights obviously inspired the human rights movement around the world. So I think that that really studying history really isn't just about the past. It's really about what kind of a world do we want to create for the future.
Your dad was so erudite and proud of his intellect and his wit. What do you think he would make of politics today? That's maybe a tough one.
Well, I think that, again, I went back, actually, and I was looking at a speech that he gave right before he became president, and he said, history will judge us by 4 qualities: courage, integrity, dedication, and judgment. So I think that that's how he would judge politics today, and I think, you know, everybody can make up their own mind.
One last question, and that is, you don't do a lot of interviews like this about your father. Is it tough to do?
Well, it's a lot easier to do with my children, and I think I'm so proud that they are, you know, proud of his legacy, and I think having a chance to share it with them and with another generation makes it a lot more fun for me, or enjoyable.
That's it for us. Thanks for watching.
AC 360 starts right now.